Welcome back to Off the Wire podcast. As you may know, we are in the middle of doing a mini series. This mini series came from the Dragos OT report. We went through that a couple episodes ago, and through that, we found there was like kind of four big categories that they covered in there and talked about. One of those being basically how OT networks are compromised. In their experience, is still through IT networks. And there's really two main ways that happens. In the last episode, as the first part of our mini series, we talked about email and how we need to do a better job of securing that. In this episode, we're going to focus on the browser. And then we have a part three and a part four coming in the next few episodes. So, our browser, it's something that is becoming something that we are using more often. And it's something that now we have to kind of look at. Again, we talked about email and how a lot of malicious things come in through that. Really, the second is the browser. And I know the browser has been a target for a while, Anthony, but are there any things in your mind that have like really ratcheted things up and why the browser now seems to be one of the top targets for compromising a machine?
I think there's a couple of reasons, and one is just where everything is moving to a browser. Even if you have an application on your desktop or your laptop, a lot of times you can run it through the browser as well. And then the other part is like browsers have basically become their own ecosystem where it's like its own operating system. Matter of fact, there's Chrome OS, which basically is just a browser based
Hmm.
system, and all of our kids are running Chromebooks where they've added on, like, the extensions and stuff like that, like, it's basically like installing applications just in the browser environment, so there's a lot going on there, and I think it's a pretty big target where everything revolves around it.
Yeah, and another thing is it's already installed, right? A lot of the other clients that are on a computer, they're not on every computer, but we all know that there's a browser. It's already pre-installed on every computer that comes in. Windows has a certain one that they pre-install. Mac has a certain one they pre-install. So if you're building some sort of way to compromise a machine, you're going to try to target things that exist on every single machine. So we really thought the best way to kind of go through this episode is really to talk about the different options we have on how to protect the browser. As we were doing some research for this episode, in my mind, Anthony, I don't know if you think differently, but it seems like there was maybe two or three things that really popped in my mind. But as we were researching, it actually expanded quite a bit. There's actually a few more things than I thought. Did you kind of have that same feeling as you were looking through?
Yeah, I'm definitely surprised at all the different ways that you can help harden your browsers.
Yeah, and I think you and I were talking a little bit before the episode. I think browsers are one of those things that I don't know if we put it last, but it's definitely seems like we have other priorities from a cybersecurity point of view. But, as you mentioned, web apps are becoming such a thing. If you really, I mean, even if you think about AI and how and the explosion that's seen, especially from the large language model perspective, really all those. I mean, they some of them do have apps, but most of those are typically used in the web. So the next gen of like let's say the latest and greatest technology is taking advantage of that browser. Everyone coming out with their own client. So kind of starting first is something that I think you have quite a bit of experience with. So I'm going to kind of defer to you a little bit, but talk to us a little bit about DNS filtering, really like how it works, kind of what options there, and then really how it can enhance how secure we can make a browser.
Yeah, and as we mentioned before, web browsing is kind of a neglected thing. A lot of people, like, they'll use their firewall for the filtering, and they just call it a day, we're good after that, just block certain categories. But we were guilty of that. We used our firewall and we had certain things, like we would have porn blocked and we would have malicious sites blocked and all that, but we were still getting hit up with things and other tools were catching it, fortunately, or we would get alerts as well. One thing that we saw was where people are going to like our local news sites. I don't like just the whole clickbait thing with news sites. They are loaded with all the ads on the side and they sell their ads to the highest bidder or however they do it. But they don't, I guess the main point is they're not vetting who is buying ad space. And we've had a couple
Hmm.
instances where they were trying to do like malware through those ads. And the firewall, the rules with it weren't catching that. And obviously we want them to be able to visit the local news sites, but in a safe manner. So we looked at rolling out a tool, and there's several tools out there. There's Cloudflare, DNS Filter, Infoblocks. I know there's several others as well. And these things, they actually, a lot of them aren't super high end in cost, and they, that you get a lot of bang for your buck. And the firewalls, like, some of them have some tools, but you're definitely missing out on some things. And I didn't really realize how much until we rolled one of these out. I think the big one is where, attackers, if they're setting up like a malicious site, they're gonna stand it up, and it's gonna be up and running until it gets caught, which is very frequently. And like one of the first rules we enabled on our tool was, domains under 30 days. Now, every once in a while, you'll have a new site that gets stood up that's under 30 days that's legitimate. And you just whitelist it, but that has blocked quite a bit of things that have stood up. And then you got your domain categorization, like, if you want to block porn or guns or gambling and all that, like it has that as well, but it's much more robust. They have a lot more categories in place. And also, I would say that you can do different, basically like different policies. So, with our SCADA, we've got it locked down. Well, there really isn't much of any browsing on that, but, we've got like a much more enforced policy on our SCADA network with that, than we do on our
Mhm.
IT network. And anyways, there's just a lot to it with the DNS filters tools. They're, you get quite a bit out of it, a lot more out of the box than what the firewalls have, and they're really not really a expensive tool to buy.
Yeah, and one thing to remember too, firewalls, I mean, firewalls do a great job. The next generation firewalls are pretty amazing, really, in what they do. But they're very static devices. So that works, when it's at your office. But if someone takes something home,
Yeah.
do you have those same protections? Typically, you don't, unless you're kind of making everything force tunnel back, and then that is stout. That basically increases the chances of performance issues. So there's always a pro and con to everything. But the one nice thing about these tools is it doesn't really matter where someone is. They're at a conference, they're on hotel Wi-Fi, they're wherever. You're still able to offer some of those protections that you don't necessarily get with your firewall using just the default configuration kind of stuff.
Another thing I just thought about, and you definitely hit that one. The people that take their laptops home, like I guess it depends. Like if you're doing split tunneling and all that, but we actually installed the clients, and that has made a big difference. Being able to make sure that people aren't visiting anything malicious while they're at the house. And another perk that I didn't think of, so we would get alerts on where someone would go to a site that would have malware, and
Hmm.
the basically the SIEM would point to our domain controller where the DNS is, because it did a request. So it would take a long time to really pinpoint which machine went to it so we could go talk to the end user. And this has sped it up. We basically just, as long as we know the site, like we can go and do a search and find out who it was real quick.
Yeah, and one thing we've been doing some evaluation of browser tools. We're going to talk about some of those in a minute, and something that's been kind of on our mind is kind of the friction of implementing something. And these are typically pretty low friction, not a lot of hoops for someone to have to jump through, not likely a lot of impact to the person as they're trying to use their device and whatever job role they have. So that is something to think about as we implement any type of restriction or protection, is to figure out like how much of an impact is this going to have. I think the top thing in my mind that comes to mind is MFA. It's great. We know we have to do it. We know it's the best practice. That introduces quite a bit of friction to someone just doing their job. So it is something to think about. So past the DNS kind of types of protection, there's additional hardening, and I think this is something that kind of gets looked over. Just doing hardening on the browser. I know you guys being proponents of the CIS subscription. I know we had an episode. It actually was before I even started on the podcast, but talking about the CIS membership and some of the things they provide. And if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, but some of these hardening, I don't know, guidelines or templates for computers, also browsing, things like that can come from that. And so talk a little bit about what is a hardening of the browser. I mean, what in a nutshell, what are you doing there? And then how does that enhance security in a way that maybe the DNS products don't?
Yeah, you're going to hear me talk about CS benchmarks till the day I die. I think it's definitely something that everyone should look at. And even if you're not a member, like they actually provide all the data for free. But if you're a member, you get the tools that help you implement this stuff like super fast. Basically, the CIS benchmarks, it's just going to be a bunch of policies. You can either implement it with group policies if you're using group policies, or you can use Intune and push all that stuff out. So whichever way you're doing things, you can implement with that. And another thing with the CIS benchmarks, I will mention, just because if someone does it wrong, like there is a right and wrong way to roll out any tool, but they have a level 1 and a level 2 for basically all of their benchmarks. And level 2, like that's like, if you're at NASA or, the DoD, or, well, even, with critical infrastructure, if you're on the OT environment, like I think that really warrants a level 2. For your normal IT network, if you roll at a level 2, basically it's going to break everything. Definitely start off with the level 1. Don't go straight to the top with their tools. But I don't know how many group policies they have for the web browser for Edge and Chrome or Firefox, but they'll have a ton out there. And it's stuff that you're not going to think about to go and lock down yourself. And to each of these, you can disable them or enable them. So if I mention one and you're like, "Oh, we're not doing that," like you can just disable it and mark it. So like we are pushing for password managers, and Chrome and Edge, they have their own password manager. So you can disable password saving in the browser so they won't rely on that and actually use the tools that you want to roll out. Um, so you can enable safe browsing where it's got Google's threat intelligence where it runs in the background. You can block third-party cookies by default because that's always an issue. You can restrict extensions to where it needs admin approval. Like that's a big thing because right now people can install extensions left and right if you don't have it locked down, and they can enforce automatic updates. That's a huge thing. And one thing that's actually outside of this, I'll mention, and I'll probably get some flack from some people, but we actually stood our ground and got rid of Chrome on all of our workstations. I think it might be on one workstation, but that's something where, everyone's saying we support Chrome. Well, Edge is Chrome based, and you can even install like the Chrome extensions in Edge. So we did away with that. So we don't have two different browsers to patch all the time. So that's something you can do. And we've had some vendors that say we only support Chrome. And I said, well, we don't allow it on our network. And we really haven't had any issue. People, at first they pop up and they're like, you got to have Chrome. And come to find out, everything works just fine on Edge. So,
Mm.
but and also another thing, like with the CIS benchmarks, like the autofill forms, like you can block that or disable that by default too. So there's a whole lot of little things out there that it'll do as well, and it's stuff that you're not going to think about. And this is really kind of doing zero trust at the browser. You're disabling all the things that aren't necessary for your organization.
Yeah, one thing to me about the browser hardening stuff, really, it's so easy and really, it's so cost effective. You really, as you mentioned, you don't necessarily have to have a membership. There's a lot of information out there. Even if you don't even look at CIS, if you just Google around about browser hardening. So I think it's one of those things that it really to me is the baseline for what we as we talk about the different tools. This is kind of the stuff that like everybody should absolutely do. There's really not a lot of excuses there. We we unfortunately, I wish we had done some of these things before or earlier, especially around the password vaults and stuff like that. Just so before people kind of got used to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But definitely some of the stuff that we're trying to implement. And I like the idea you mentioned about kind of limiting your browser. We've talked about that a lot on this podcast, which is if you don't have it, then you don't have to secure it. So if there's less things, even though we all know they're kind of, at least most of the browsers now are Chromium based, still, if you have less things, then that's less to patch, which helps you out as well. All right. So one of the things we kind of, I don't know, we went back and forth. Appreciate Anthony about this on whether to mention it, but one of the tools that is still available, it's definitely, I don't want to throw too much shade in any direction, but I would say it's definitely a tool that's been around a lot longer, and I think you can argue that it may be supplanted, let's say, by more modern tools, but there's still the option. There are still players in this space, and that is the secure web gateway web proxy. So, in a nutshell, this is basically sitting, a device, probably a virtual machine, but it could be potentially a hardware device that's really sitting in between The user and the internet somewhere in line. Basically, it is taking a look at the traffic. It's inspecting that traffic. It's also doing those URL kind of filtering stuff. Some of the players in this space, one that's been around forever, Barracuda. There's also Zscaler and Netscope. I noticed some of these players are kind of marketing themselves as more than just kind of a web filter now, but definitely a older type of protection. I'm not saying it's not useful in ways, but definitely not a newer modern thing. A big thing really with a lot of these tools, but especially with this one, is that SSL inspection. So much traffic to the internet now is secured, which is great, but because of that, it basically keeps you from being able to view that in quite the same way that you could before when a lot of the web traffic was unencrypted. Um, so without that, it kind of limits its effectiveness. Am I missing anything, Anthony? Anything that we need to kind of say as well on this product?
No, I really don't want to badmouth it. We did have a bad use case, or when I got to Fort County, they had a web proxy and we had a lot of issues, and it also made browsing the web very slow as well. But I would bet that there's actually still good tools out there that do quite a bit. And really, the main thing I would look at is what, for data loss prevention, like you mentioned, everything's basically running over HTTPS. If you're looking for that, like I'm sure this would probably be a good avenue to implement that.
Yeah, so definitely not saying it's something that's not effective, just that it's been around a while. Not always the case, but sometimes in the cyber world, especially when things have been around a while, malicious actors have figured out ways to work around some of these things. But again, I think some of these tools are maybe throwing in a little more feature set now, and they're really kind of moving past just a basic web proxy. But it definitely is something that you can use. So we definitely wanted to make sure we mentioned it. So let's take a quick break. If you're enjoying what you're listening to on the podcast or what you're viewing, if you're taking a look at it on YouTube, make sure to follow us so you never miss one of our episodes and click that notification so you get notified right whenever our new content comes out. And it's something we ask a lot, and we really do want the show to grow. So if you're listening to this and someone out there that really could use or could really get some value out of the content we're providing, just reach out and share it with them and say, hey, check out this episode to see if it's something you would enjoy. It really does help whenever we all have had that, right? We've all had that friend recommend something to us, and typically we do that, right? Because we trust them. So if you enjoy the show, share it with someone who also might enjoy it. All right, Anthony, let's get back to it. You kind of alluded to it earlier. One of the tools, it's kind of, I don't know, I thought of it's not something you would think about, I guess, directly, because it's not maybe some sort of tool that's like doing an analysis of traffic or something in the web page, but something that actually makes the browsing experience more secure in various ways is Enterprise Password Manager. So in your mind, what about that, or what about the password manager, especially the enterprise password manager, is really like helping enhance that browsing security?
Well, first, I'm going to thank you for this one. Not saying we didn't use a password manager. We use a password manager for IT only. And then I was speaking with you, and you were rolling out to all of the employees. And, anyways, I kind of borrowed that idea from you and rolled it out. And that's honestly been a godsend. And honestly, there's so many things besides security that it helps with that it's worth it, even for those reasons alone. But, when we rolled it out, I will say I researched it. You're not really gonna find too much that's going to talk bad about the browser password vaults that they have built in, and I think the reason you really won't see, I'm not saying that they're terrible products or anything like that, but I think the consensus is for cybersecurity, they would rather you do that than use the same password. Anything is better than reusing the same password over and over. But,
Hmm.
but those things, they can be a target, and they've gotten much better. Back in the day, they were all unencrypted and you could just find the hidden file and open them up. Of course,
Yeah.
that's not the case now, but, with the enterprise tool, like, you have control over it. You can actually see passwords that are part of a breach and know if your employees are using it. You don't get to see their passwords, but you can see that they're part of a breach and report on
Hmm.
that. You can tell if they're reusing passwords. There's just a lot to it, and it just makes life so much easier. I'll say that. Like it, let alone the security stuff. It makes life easier just because it's got a browser extension. You've got with the mobile devices, like you can use like the Face ID to unlock it, or you can use your fingerprint to unlock it, and it really just makes things so much easier for the end users. But the big thing I would say with the browser ones is that you can roll two-factor out and require that with these password managers, and that's a must. Like if you're going to have, all the keys of the kingdom in one location, like you've got to know that that is a safe and secure environment. And one thing I'll mention that I don't think this is done all the time, and I don't know necessarily I would recommend it, but I just want to throw this out there. With some of these password managers, like for our normal end users, we have it where the password manager itself hosts it. But for like our OT environment and our IT environment, we actually have that, separately hosted outside of that group.
Hmm.
And it's got some additional measures in place to, monitor traffic and stuff like that. But that really protects you because there has been instances, like I think one password where they've had, some issues, some security issues. I might be wrong on which one it was, but there's been a couple in the past, and
Yeah.
that gives you an extra safeguard. But there's several out there that have had no security issues, so I wouldn't definitely wouldn't shy away from using the password manager. And one last thing is I'll just mention with passkeys, like they are phishing resistant and they're actually really easy to use, over passwords. So passkeys, they're all supported in these password managers, and that's a great tool to have.
This is kind of, I think, also not only for you, I guess, in using different passwords in different places, but it's really a protection for your data in someone else's network, right? You're going to be using going to different websites, logging in, and basically what you're kind of banking on is someone else to screw up, right, at some point, and a website to get compromised. Maybe not even your fault. May have nothing to do with the protections you've put in place. But because we're using credentials to log in at all these different sites, having those unique credentials really limits what can be touched and compromised. Just to kind of, there has been some various ones that have had issues, but I tend to think, I don't know, especially with a lot of these things, when they do have an issue, if as long as they respond well to it, sometimes a company that's had a security issue is the most secure right then, right? But there are a bunch of different options out there. LastPass, they've had a couple issues. I think OnePassword did have one issue, but there's a Bitwarden, there's Keeper. Gosh, I know I'm probably missing several, but there are a bunch of options out there. And as you mentioned, a lot of them will help protect you. If you don't have some other tool, some of them can even serve as like a two-factor, kind of an endpoint for two-factor too. So, and it's just great tools. A little bit unique, not something you would think of when you think of like a browser protection or a browsing protection, but more on the fact of as you're logging into all these tools, having something that's creating unique logins and making sure you're not using kind of basic level passwords is helping you be a much safer browser.
Yeah, one thing I do want to mention, there really is no excuse not to roll out password managers at this point because there are open source password managers that are good.
Hmm.
I think we both use the same one. I think it was KeyPass. I've used it
Hmm.
for well over a decade, and it was just basically more of ease to rolling it out and managing it is why we switched. But like there's definitely nothing wrong with those open source tools.
Yeah, no, KeyPass has been around forever. So, and KeyPass has some unique features too because you can actually, it can run on its own. It doesn't necessarily need to be installed or anything like that. So you can kind of make it portable. You can put it on a USB drive and you can take it with you when you don't need it. So makes it even more protected than being on an online computer or in the cloud. It's literally offline. You can store it in a closet if you need to. So one of the things that's kind of coming on with some steam lately, it's not that they've not been around for a while, but I think with the browser, as we mentioned earlier, becoming much more of the main interface when you're using the computer, enterprise browser controls. And I put controls because there are really two flavors of this particular tool. There's those that are based that are extensions and work as extensions and do all the controls via that. And there's some that are basically a complete browser, an enterprise browser replacement. So what do these do in a nutshell? The extensions they install as an extension, and they give you like control and the ability to put policy in place for the browser. They have a lot of features. I'll talk about some of them in a minute, but the enterprise browser gives you all of the same features, sometimes a little bit extra as well, since it is actually replacing the browser. But it is completely different browser versus using the browser you came with. Some of the options out there, Island has both. Talon from Palo Alto. There's a Keep Aware. There's an option from Chrome. There's an option from Surf Security, Harmony Browse. There's probably about 15 out there that I'm sure we're not naming. But these are basically giving you granular control, and they work several different ways, but most of them work by doing an inspection on what the browser has seen. So various ways. Some of the ones I've seen, they wrap what's in the browser kind of discreetly, and then with that wrapper, they're able to analyze the fields that's going on. They can see a username and password. They can see all the different pieces and parts of the web page, and then they can implement some protections. Well, one is just the basic of they can try to determine if the website is malicious prior to you even actually interacting with the website, just when you visit the website. And if they do, then obviously you can have them block that. They give you a lot of DLP controls, and this is probably where they're one of the strongest because they can actually see input into the browser. If someone types in something that you don't want them putting in a browser, or if they copy and paste something into a particular service that you're not allowing, then they can actually restrict that. They can restrict whether you can upload or download. They can take a look at downloaded files and try to determine if they're malicious. And if they are, they can actually cancel the download before anything actually touches. One neat thing about how these work, or really kind of a mindset shift on how these work, is they're really especially good in a BYOD environment because the idea is the browser is going to be where I implement my policy, and I don't care as much necessarily about what computer is actually using the browser, right? I don't necessarily, maybe it's a contractor, maybe it's just regular BYOD, it's a employee's computer that they have. I may not have as much control, but like because the browser is such a big part of the experience on a desktop or on a computer, then I'm just going to control it there. Now, it also offers a ton of visibility into the browser. Now, we know that firewalls can see a lot of those things now, but without SSL decryption, a lot of that just looks like secure traffic. You get a little bit deeper of an audit trail with one of these tools. You can inventory what the different services people are using, like especially around AI. You can kind of manage and whitelist where you want people to go, where you don't want, and provide screens that you can customize to tell them why they should or shouldn't. They can also request access. And one thing that I think is, at least from what I've seen, not able to be done with other tools is that you can have granular control over websites. Most of the other things we've talked about, whether it's DNS, and you correct me, like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, but I believe with all the other tools we've talked about, you can restrict where someone's going to go. But what you can't do is you can restrict some of the things they can do on that site and not
Yeah.
others.
Wow.
And that's where the browser tools really shine is, for example, let's use an AI example that's pretty hot and a topic on everyone's mind. Let's say you purchased an enterprise subscription of Gemini, and that's where you want your people using, and that's where you want them to share their work data. But you don't want to really completely eliminate the ChatGPT or Grok or any of the other ones, but you definitely want them not using that for work-related stuff. So you could set up a policy that allows Gemini pretty much full access if they're logged in. You can actually determine the differences between Gemini not logged in and Gemini logged in, and you can say, well, if they're logged in, very little restrictions. If they're not logged in, or if they're using any of these other vendors, then they can use them, but they can't copy and paste, they can't upload, they can't download, they can just type. So you could make it, you also can implement DLP controls. So even if they're typing and they type in some of the data that you have, whether it's PII plus or just an account number or anything like that, it can actually either eliminate it out of the text box or basically just convert it to all X's. Pretty interesting. So we talked about friction a lot. Blocking tools just indiscriminately, that may be what your policy says, and that may be something you choose to do. But this is a way where you can kind of lower that friction level. It's, hey, we're not completely stopping you from using these tools. We just don't want to allow you to use that for work. These can, in some cases, potentially have higher user friction than some things because you're getting a lot more granular. Potentially, even you have to consider potential privacy concerns for a user. But again, as far as like the granularity of what you can do, I have not seen another tool that allows you to secure the browser in this way.
Yeah, the first time I heard you talk about that, I was very excited. And I'm not gonna lie, like I did not know about enterprise browsers until you mentioned it to me, like 6 months ago or whenever we discussed it. The capabilities, I mean, that just sounds amazing. And with with AI, like I feel like this tool, like I'm kind of waiting to see how it shakes out with you, get some lessons learned. But I feel like with all the things that AI is doing, like this is almost in the necessity. And
Mm,
another thing we didn't mention, like with the why browsers are attacked at the beginning. One thing people need to be aware of is the AI browsers, and then like the basically the extensions you plug in. They can literally control your entire computer if you allow them to. Like, it can navigate, it can run your terminals, like, it can do anything that a person can do on a computer. So,
mm.
anyways, that's something that, is gonna become more prevalent as time goes and, people learn about these tools, but that stuff's out there, and, while it's amazing, it also opens up a whole new attack vector that really, is quite dangerous.
Yeah, and most of these that I've seen and have kind of looked into, that is one of the things they do, and I didn't mention that, so I'm glad you brought it up. But extension management and control, they can. It's kind of weird. It's like an extension. It does take an agent, I will say. At least what we've seen as we've looked at these is to manage extensions. You are required to have an agent as well. And it kind of makes sense. An extension shouldn't be able to manage other extensions, so but most of these offer extension management. So you can basically have that installed and you can keep people from installing other extensions as well. So that's an additional tool. Now, we'd be remiss, Anthony, if we didn't talk about some of the ways where we can use kind of existing tools to give us some additional browsing protections, or at least to maybe buff up some protections we have as we're trying to browse around. So I'm going to kind of let you kind of finish us out with this last tool, and that's really our existing tools like EDR, our SIM. Talk about how those can be used to help enhance and protect the browsing experience for a user.
I think it's probably safe bet to say that EDR is probably saving a lot of people's butts right now with the web browsing and the security. Especially if you don't have any of these other tools, like you're really banking that EDR is going to catch it. And which is why we're recommending that you do implement some of these other tools, especially some of the easy ones. But, whether you're using CrowdStrike, Sentinel One, or name your own, whatever EDR that you're on, like they have a lot of insight, into what happens inside your browser, especially with like, I know a lot of them do this, but like with CrowdStrike, like you can see basically everything that happens inside the OS. And with the browsers, though, I would say what's important though is you need to make sure that you're pushing that data or the telemetry for the browser to your SIEM. Because when something happens, like you need to be able to find it and find it quick, especially the
Mm,
response time to an incident. Just in a matter of minutes, like they can accomplish so much. Matter of fact, I think there was one organization we heard that had, I think within 19 minutes, it was like almost everything on their network was encrypted, especially with like SANs and how fast they are
that's
now.
correct.
They could encrypt everything like super quick. Like that's, it's awesome to have these super fast storage solutions, but that's a downside is, how fast they can encrypt your network. So whether you're if you got multiple failed logins to a SaaS, like you can push that over to Steam. If you've got new browser extensions, if you got people using HTTP, to access websites. I mean, hopefully you're blocking some of this anyways, but if that stuff makes it through, you want your EDR to catch it and also push it to your Steam so you know that it's happening. I'm not saying, it's the EDRs, we all manage it and they've got their own alerts, but the SIEM, like it really, we use it kind of like the hyper focus through the noise, like because we get a lot of noise with all the security tools, and if it hits that SIEM,
Mm.
like that's where we're like, oh, Like, we really need to respond to this. So, and anyways, there's just a lot of things, like browsers spawning a process and stuff like that. So you definitely want to make sure, one, you got to make sure you got an EDR and everything. Doesn't matter what it is, server, workstation, Linux, Mac OS, Windows, there's no exceptions. There can be no exceptions to having EDR. And then having a SIEM, like that's something that like I know people are kind of growing cybersecurity at their own speed, but when you get to a good point, you definitely want to have a team to help you out. Like they're a lot of work, but they're worth it. I'll say that, once you get it implemented right. And that's something where we have help with. We didn't really roll it out. We had some ideas and we worked with the vendor and they kind of manage it for us. So, if you need help,
Mhm.
reach out for help.
Yeah, only thing I will say, or just kinda I wanna caveat this a little bit, is EDR is really good, and we've had a couple browser recently, some, I don't know, I guess, local desktops that got compromised, and EDR really was first on the scene letting us know. But I will say the only downside really to me with some of these tools is it does really have to impact the local machine. So some of the other tools we mentioned before, the idea is, hey, can we eliminate the person even having an option to click on
Mm.
this, or can we not load this website, or various other things. That's really trying to basically, I'm not even going to give us a chance of having to figure out whether our EDR can figure this problem out or not. EDR works really, really well, but by that point you have had some interaction with the local computer. So that is one step further. It's definitely, if you can't do anything else, if you're like, hey, we got no time, we're a small shop, we can't do anything else. Yeah, I mean, definitely something you can kind of rely on. But ideally you want to try to layer on additional tools and try to prevent that from getting to the local computer if at all
Yeah.
possible. All right, Anthony, as we close out, I think one thing you kind of had in the show notes here that we have kind of talked about several times. I think we've both said this, but I wanted you to kind of finish it out because I think you have a really good perspective on it. And that is sometimes we get overwhelmed by kind of all the things we have to secure in all the different ways, and the browser and the local endpoint and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we both said this, but not letting, perfect be the enemy of good and making sure that you're doing something. So to kind of wrap us up and kind of talk to that point.
Yeah, it's really just a list of where to start. And this could be a little unique for everyone, but I think this is just a good, safe order to roll things out. And because everyone's like, well, which is more important? Which, if you don't have anything, where do I start? And, anyways, this is just a recommendation. I would say one, start with DNS filtering. Like, that's a quick win. And I will say I kind of knock the firewalls, but if your firewall has DNS filtering and it's not enabled, enable it. Like definitely do that. You're way better off with
Mhm.
that than nothing. If you want to spend a little extra money for some additional features, then look for a dedicated tool. And like I said, they're not very costly for what they are. And the next item I would say is the CIS hardening. Whether you have a membership or not, look at that. And you can research and find a bunch of group policies and stuff like that. And I know some people may get overwhelmed at looking at the CS benchmarks, but just take it one bite at a time. And once you have it rolled out, it's super easy to maintain. So just say you're going to start with Edge or Chrome or both. You roll out the group policies, you roll it out to a group, and then every time you get a new workstation or a new laptop or whatever device, you just add it to that group, and then it automatically hardens that whole system. So once you get it rolled out, it's real easy to maintain. And again, I just want to remind people there's two layers. There's like a level one and level two. Definitely start with a level one. And then all we do is we have a simple spreadsheet with all of the CIS benchmarks that we have applied to our systems and just track the ones that you don't want implemented. And then I would say after that, the enterprise password manager, and again, we'll mention like there's good open source tools out there. If you don't have any money, like KeyPass is a good tool. Like we both use it for a long time. I would highly recommend it. We were just willing to spend a
Mhm.
little bit for some just kind of ease of use. I won't say KeyPass is not ease of use. It was just managing it for all the people using it. And,
Mhm.
that it also will save you in a lot when you've got turnover. If you've got people with unique positions where they have a bunch of logins, and then all of a sudden you've got to reset every account or sometimes you can't even get back into those accounts. You just got to buy a new subscription. Those things can save your hind end in more ways than one. And then after that, I would say either the web proxy or the enterprise browser. Like the enterprise browser, I think 5 years out, I think this is going to be a much bigger thing than what it is now. That's one that we're definitely excited to see how this shakes out with Tanner. We're definitely interested in looking at it. We're all at our own stage in cybersecurity, and like right now, we're not at that stage, but we're gonna get there. And anyway, and I say that for there's nothing to be ashamed of if you don't have any DNS filtering or if you don't have the CIS benchmarks or any of these. Just start with one, roll it out, and it takes time.
Yeah, something I used to tell a guy that one of our cyber guys that works in a different position now, but used to be in that cyber position is if we get a little bit more secure every day, then we've had a successful day because we're not going to get there every night. And unfortunately, the goalposts keep getting moved. So you can't kind of fault yourself for what you don't have done. You just have to kind of take that step forward and push a little bit farther each day. Kind of just circling it. Again, I talked about earlier this mini series based on the Dragos report. And a lot of people may be listening to this and saying, what does this have to do with OT? Well, um, as we mentioned in the Dragos report, IT is the number one reason the OT gets compromised, an IT network compromised. So if we can keep people out of the IT network, then we are keeping people out of the OT network kind of by default, right? So that's kind of where that tie-in goes. And again, we're super excited for the next couple episodes. Next episode is going to be on third-party vendor management, which is also an area where you can be compromised, along with the email and through the browser, as we've talked about the last two episodes. And then we're going to really hit the big one for OT, and that's OT network monitoring. We're going to talk about the tools there and why that is something that's needed in that environment. So stick around, listen to the next couple episodes coming up. As we always mention, share this episode with someone who you think could use it. And until next time, this is episode Off the Wire.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, as we mentioned in the Dragos report, IT is the number one reason the OT gets compromised, an IT network compromised. So if we can keep people out of the IT network, then we are keeping people out of the OT network kind of by default, right? So that's kind of where that tie-in goes. And again, we're super excited for the next couple episodes. Next episode is going to be on third-party vendor management, which is also an area where you can be compromised, along with the email and through the browser, as we've talked about the last two episodes. And then we're going to really hit the big one for OT, and that's OT network monitoring. We're going to talk about the tools there and why that is something that's needed in that environment. So stick around, listen to the next couple episodes coming up. As we always mention, share this episode with someone who you think could use it. And until next time, this is episode Off the Wire.
Thank you, everyone.